We have not one but two Game 7s in the Eastern Conference playoff setup who will be in the Eastern Conference Finals. We know who's in the Western Conference Finals. It's the Clippers and the Suns. Of course, that's tomorrow afternoon. But tonight, we have the Bucks versus the Nets. Tomorrow night, Sixers versus the Hawks. You hear all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. By the way, coverage for both games is at 8 o'clock. So how about some symbiotic situation going on there for us here on 97.3 ESPN. Joining us right now to get more into the NBA playoffs. He joins us right here, as he has always on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. He is Jonathan Von Tobel. JVT, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm feeling really good. Very exciting times for the Los Angeles Clippers, my guys.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were all over them the last time we talked, and they paid off for you, man. They paid off big, so congratulations. You see you're wearing the hat again. Good job.
Yeah, well, they didn't get there the way you thought, right? If you told me 2 days ago after they had lost Kawhi Leonard that no, they're going to win 2 straight, make it to the Western Conference Finals, it's fine. It is pretty astonishing, but credit goes to Paul George, Ty Lue, and the rest of those guys. Terrence Mann, of course.
I was like, Terrence Mann. I mean, what the heck? I mean, that guy just decided, my time now, move out of the way.
You're right. Well, and some of the highlights too, like was it Game 5 where he pump fakes on Gobert in the corner and drives and dunks on him. The threes he was hitting yesterday. I mean, but look, this is the postseason. You know, I saw a lot of maybe trying to denigrate a little bit, like, oh, you needed 40 points from Terrence Mann. You know, this is the postseason, man. Like, sometimes you get those performances from guys. You get these incredible games to keep you alive or win a series, and that's what it was yesterday. So, a really good win for the Clippers, regardless, I think, of the support where you're at, unless you're, of course, a Jazz supporter monetarily or emotionally. You know, that was a really impressive series win in my mind for the Clippers.
Well, I think you're safe because out here, I don't think most people could even name half the Jazz roster at this point.
Right.
So I think you're okay there. But let's get to the Eastern Conference because we have 2 Game 7s this weekend. I want to first end with the Sixers game last night because I was talking about this earlier before you jumped on. To me, we learned that the Sixers have some intestinal fortitude last night. We learned that this team can get knocked down multiple times in a title fight and get back up off the mat before the 10 count. And I feel like you learned that Embiid, Tobias Harris, they looked themselves in the mirror and they said, you know what? We have what it takes. And they won despite the fouls, despite the refs, despite Ben Simmons, despite being in Atlanta. They found a way to win, and I think that was a big, big moment for them.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. You know, when you're backed into a corner, largely of your own making as well, right? You know, the way that they have played over those second halves in the last 2 games, you know, I like this Hawks team a lot, and it's nothing to slight them. But if you've watched this series, the reason we are at a Game 7 is because of the execution or lack thereof of the Philadelphia 76ers.
Right.
It's not so much what the Atlanta Hawks have done to them, right? They still have no answer for Joel Embiid. Seth Curry has burned them quite a bit. So I would agree with that. Like, you know, if you make the mistakes to put yourself in that position and you're in a back and forth, you know, tight affair with a team that has taken advantage of those and you eventually pull it out. And by the way, a tight fourth quarter game, right? Because you had been awful in clutch time in this series going into yesterday. They had a negative 21 net rating and a record of 1-4 in the postseason in games that with the clutch time. And so they actually pull it out like that. No, that's really impressive.
Now, to me, I think there's one big situation we got to keep an eye on for Game 7. The loss of Bogdanovic for the Hawks, it looks like, for that Game 7. I think that's a big reason why this line right now is 6.5. You know, you are the host of the Hardwood Handicapers podcast, and I got to tell you, as soon as I saw that line, the first thing I thought of was no Bogdanovic. That hurts the Hawks offense a lot.
Oh, 100%. And it hurts them defensively as well, right? I mean, one, he's a brilliant scorer. He's a very good shooter, but he's a really big-bodied guy who can, of course, defend multiple positions as well. Sneakily decent in a lot of his defensive analytics, too. But, yes, in that direction, it does seem like even if he is not, or even if he does play, maybe not 100%, right? We've seen multiple times now in this postseason. You know, Mike Conley comes back, wasn't really 100%. James Harden comes back, not 100%. Anthony Davis comes back and has to leave a game because he's not fully healthy. So even if he does play, you can't expect a fully healthy Bogdan Bogdanovic. And I would agree with that sentiment. And look, I think the market has relatively been strong on Philadelphia throughout this series. You know, the market sees that there is a gap between these two teams, right? That there were 4 consecutive games in which they led by double digits at one point. Sure, they blew 2 of them, but they built up those leads. The fact that, the market moved in their direction again yesterday, taking on Atlanta to force a Game 7. So the market's been pretty high on Philadelphia, regardless of the situation. It's just the 76ers got to kick it into gear, and luckily they have, and now they got to win one to take it.
Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on Sports Bash Saturday here on 97.3 ESPN, at MeJVT on Twitter. Of course, Bucks versus Nets tonight, Game 7, 8 o'clock on 97.3 ESPN FM, and then Sixers tomorrow night at 8 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN FM. The other side of the Sixers is, I want to get your opinion. I'm going to leave it open-ended for you. Where do you land on the Ben Simmons thing? Because Ben Simmons has become the most controversial, heated topic here in the New Jersey, Philadelphia, Delaware Valley region, because there's a point right now where you have half the fan base screaming, trade him, get rid of him, I don't care what happens in this series. The other side are saying he's the best defensive player in the year. He should have been defensive player of the year. Where do you stand?
So, I mean, look, I don't think there's any arguing how good he is as a defender. You know, maybe not the best series near the tail end, but remember when they adjusted and they threw him and Matisse Thybulle on Trae Young in Game 2, there was a really big improvement in this team's defense. But what I think is weird about Ben Simmons is, like, it seems, and I don't want to denigrate his character or anything like that, but it does seem like the things that hold him back as a player are things that he just doesn't want to change as a player, right? Like, for example, like the free throw shooting, shoot with the other hand, right? He's a right-handed guy. Well, the inability or the he doesn't want to, right? The lack of desire to change hands and maybe fix his free throw shooting in that regard. The refusal to potentially add not even a three-point shot, because I've always been in the camp like, I don't need you to shoot threes, but I need you to hit mid-range jumpers. I need you to hit a push shot or a floater or something to expand your game from about 14 feet. And he doesn't want to do that either. And so that's what I find is really weird about Ben Simmons is it seems like all of it is just born of stubbornness to a certain extent of him not wanting to change his game. Now, I don't know him personally, obviously, but it seems like all of the problems, you know, I go back to a guy like Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin didn't have a jump shot when he started his career. Blake Griffin added a jump shot. Now it's a reliable arsenal, a piece of his arsenal. You know, it's something that these guys can do. Kawhi Leonard, and he's not going to be the level of those guys from his jump shot perspective, but he can still add it, and it's still going to be a reliable weapon. So that's always what's intrigued me about Simmons. You know, I think there is something there, but I've always been intrigued by the fact that, you know, he just doesn't seem to want to make those changes, and that's what's led us to this point right now.
Now, the other side of it is, I got to ask you, I got to wonder also, people want him traded. The people who I asked them, don't you think that maybe his trade value has been hurt by this series? You know, maybe before the Hawks series was the moment that everyone pounds the table and says, get rid of him. But at the same time, how many teams around the NBA look at him being like, you know, I might have given up a lot for Ben Simmons before, but maybe not be as much right now.
Yeah, you're definitely, there's a chance you're selling low at this point right now if you're going to ship him off in the offseason. But I still think there's a value in a guy like Ben Simmons, and he'd still be a guy that's wanted around the league. And maybe, you know, maybe the ancillary pieces in a deal get tweaked a little bit, right? You know, maybe and it's like one fewer second round pick or something like that in terms of what we've seen. But I still think that he would demand something. When you have a defender of his ability, when you have a guy who can lead your offense in transition the way that he does, because he still has high points of his game, you know, that's still really valuable in today's NBA. And maybe the right coaching staff can get something a little bit more out of him in terms of changing his game. So I would still think that even if they're going to trade him, you're going to get a decent package back. Maybe the little pieces in that deal are different, but I still think for the most part, you're getting a similar package.
Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN, at MeJVT on Twitter. Of course, Sixers versus Hawks tomorrow night, Game 7, 8 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. The other Game 7 is tonight, Bucks and Nets. And I'll be honest with you, I have no idea who's winning this game tonight. And it seems like everywhere I see, it's a pick'em game on the books. And I feel like everyone's in the same position. Nobody knows what to expect tonight, because if the Bucks show up, the Bucks should win. But if only Giannis shows up, then the Bucks are going to lose. And I think we've figured out pretty quickly in this series is when his teammates play well, the Bucks can win. But if it's just Giannis versus the Nets, he's probably not winning. And who knows if Mike James will show up for another big game in Game 7 here. I mean, this Nets team is such an enigma as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think it's interesting. So, and this has been, I will say this, the market is telling you that Milwaukee is the better team. You know, sitting at a pick right now, and again, in Brooklyn, we're talking about this, you know, odds makers have factored in home court to be worth about 2.5 points. So the fact that this is sitting at pick, market's telling you that Milwaukee, at least this version of Brooklyn, that they're better than them by about 2.5 points on a neutral court. So whether you believe that or not is going to be something. I'm not sure if I'm there quite yet, but what's intrigued me about this game here, so now we have 2 games back with James Harden. In the first game, you know, 7 assists, but wasn't really useful. But you saw him break out a little bit in the last game, right? 16, 5, and 7. He was 5 and 9 from the floor, 3 and 6 from three-point range, showed a little bit more life. The usage wasn't there. It was all about Kevin Durant, who had a usage rate of over 45%. But if Harden is getting slowly healthier and starting to find a little bit more explosiveness on that hamstring, they don't have an answer for Kevin Durant. The last 2 games, he's shooting over 50%, and he's scored over 80 points. It's pretty clear that the P.J. Tucker stopper thing really isn't working that well. So now, all of a sudden, if you get James Harden, who's starting to look a little bit more spry on that leg, if Joe Harris all of a sudden breaks out of this slump that is absolutely massive, I don't know what's going on with Harris, a nearly 50% shooter, just can't find the rim. It's incredible. Then you're back at home. So you would think that the role player plays a little bit better in that regard. I think Brooklyn's in a relatively good spot to win this game. And you mentioned the other part of this. Giannis has been solid. One of the big adjustments they made, no three-point shots from him in the last game, which you really like. But Drew Holiday 1 of 10 from three-point range. The other pieces outside of that weren't shooting the ball very well. And if Chris Middleton's going to go nuts, that's great. But remember, that game was a 5-point game before Middleton's fouled on a three-point shot. And they go on a 14-0 run. I think Brooklyn's in a pretty good spot here to win this game. So it's not insanely confident. It's a pick for a reason. These two are really tightly contested. But I think Brooklyn's going to win this series today.
From a betting perspective, is the safer bet just to play the under because the under has hit so many times so far in this series?
So you would think just because it has hit so many times, but remember these haven't been adjusted, right? You're not just getting the same static under for every single one of these. Game 1, the total was 239.5. Now we're at 216.5. So that's a 23-point difference between those two totals. And on top of that, right, you're back at home where Brooklyn should play a little bit better offensively, and because they have, I think 3 games in Brooklyn up to this point in this series, so they have offensive ratings of over 120. They have played much better on the offensive end. So really, the value to me is actually betting this thing over because we've seen such an adjustment from game 1 all the way down here to 23 points. This is going to be something that I think, and if you get Milwaukee to show up, if Brooklyn's more comfortable, this might be higher scoring than people think. So there is some value, I think, in betting this thing over as opposed to under because the odds makers have made quite the adjustment.
Let's jump over to the Western Conference. Your Clippers are taking on the Suns, and I got to admit, I'm surprised that the Clippers are underdog right now because of the unknown status of Chris Paul. Nobody knows when. First of all, let's not overlook the fact that this situation with him and the COVID protocols is a complete gray area that's surrounded by fog that's inside a warehouse that is in the middle of nowhere because Chris Paul supposedly apparently got the vaccine. Then he tests positive, but we don't know if he has symptoms or not. And if you have symptoms or not, that's the reason why the NBA gives you a number of days off. And you got to have 2 consecutive negative tests in a 24-hour period to get back on the court. I mean, so who knows when Chris Paul is coming back? But I feel pretty confident to say that he might not be there for game 1. So why are the Clippers underdogs right now?
So what I find one, they're going to be on the road, right? So that's part of it. The other part is, I kind of agree with your sentiment to an extent because we generally see the market when star players are questionable. We will see the market hedge in the direction that the star player is not going to play, right? And so when you're looking at Phoenix in the range of a 4-point favorite, the market will react if Chris Paul is ruled out. Or ruled in, I should put it that way. So if Chris Paul is ruled in, I am willing to bet that this one's going to get to like 5, which is really interesting because this is a number that tells me Chris Paul is playing, right? So to your point, when you're looking at this, give it everything. I'm not sure Chris Paul is going to play. I don't know how you have a read on it, but I'm fascinated by this number opening as high as it is because if Chris Paul is ruled in, the market is going to pounce on it, and there is going to be an adjustment up to 4.5 or 5, and that seems really high given what the Clippers have, in their level of talent. So, and when he's ruled out, we'll see the adjustment. The Suns will still be favored by about 2.5 points or so. But I'm with you. If there is no Chris Paul, this is a team that I have real questions about their depth when it comes to the Phoenix Suns. A lot of the guys that were coming off the bench in that Denver series were posted minuses in that plus minus in a lot of those games. Denver would cut into the deficits when they would go to their bench. So I agree that this number opened up pretty high, given the unknown factor, given what we know about how the market reacts to injuries and absences. It's put itself in a spot where if Paul's ruled in, it's going to be 5. And if Paul's ruled out, we're talking about the Suns still being favored by about 2.5 points. And I think the Clippers would be very live in a game like that.
Now, obviously, the other side, there's been no Kawhi for the last few games. We have no idea when he's coming back. Yeah. Can the Clippers beat the Suns without Kawhi Leonard?
So I think they can. It would obviously be very, very hard to do so. But look, this is a team that went 2-1 against the Suns this year. In the first two games, they handled them very, very well. And Kawhi was on the floor for that, so you got to give that take that with a grain of salt. But Paul George, they didn't have an answer for Paul George in those games. Paul George was really good against the Phoenix Suns this year. And there's also this aspect of this small ball lineup that they have discovered. You hope that Ty Lue doesn't try to match the size again at the beginning of the series like he did in both, the Dallas series and, of course, the Utah series. And that they just go small and try to force Ayton out of the paint again and just try to get him to guard in space and what they have been doing for the last couple of series. So I think if Ty Lue sticks to his guns in terms of this small ball lineup, there's a lot of guys who could attack off the paint, attack off the bounce, hit 3-point shots. It'll be a really, really tough series, but there is definitely a universe in which the Suns lose this series to the Los Angeles Clippers if Kawhi Leonard isn't going to be there. But even if he is, if he's going to miss it, my way of attacking this, Josh, was going to be taking some plus 1.5s on the series. You know what I mean? Plus 1.5 games for the Los Angeles Clippers. I think they're going to be pretty live in this series. They're a really good team. Ty Lue deserves credit for what he's been doing from a coaching perspective, and they're relatively deep, and I like their depth a little bit better than I like Phoenix's.
That leads me right to my next question for you. Ty Lue was criticized a lot early in the playoffs. Doc Rivers has been ripped. They keep bringing up the 3-1 losses out here in the Philadelphia area. Steve Nash, no Game 7 experience as a coach, right? Where do you stand on the remaining coaches here? Because this is an interesting collection, and realistically, the only guy who has a real resume right now is Doc Rivers. Everybody else is pretty much fresh to all this.
Yeah. I mean, I love what Monty Williams did with Phoenix. I think he got a raw deal, not winning Coach of the Year. I thought he did a phenomenal job with the Suns throughout this entire year. So much of what they do offensively is tied to what Monty Williams likes to do as a coach. So it might be surprising given, I guess the relatively new status of the Suns, but I think I'd put Monty Williams up there with the best of them, of the remaining coaches. And Ty Lue too. Ty Lue, he deserves a lot of flack for being a little slow on the take, right? There are times where he'll try stuff and he'll see what sticks to the wall and it takes him a minute, but he gets credit for once he finds something, he will pound you over the head until you realize that you have to do something about it. And he did that. It's exactly what he did to the Utah Jazz. Benching Rajon Rondo, getting rid of Ivica Zubac's minutes, realizing that Patrick Beverley still had something left in the tank and was a good matchup here for Donovan Mitchell. So I think that Ty Lue should be up there as well. I think I saw the record yesterday, 12-1 when his team can clinch a series. He's a solid coach, man. Is he going to, outdo you X's and O's every single time? No, but he deserves a ton of credit for getting to this point. And we know about the weaknesses of the other guys. And Nate McMillan's an interesting character too, because McMillan did a good job with the Pacers, gets fired. We see what happened with Indiana this year. It was an absolute nightmare. And we see what happened in the turnaround with Atlanta. So I think you got to include McMillan in that deal too.
Of all the teams left, one more before I let you go, Jonathan Von Tobel joining us here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN. Of all the teams left, how do you rank them in terms of who should be, not who is, Vegas saying is the favorite, who should be the favorite to win the championship? Because as we've already laid out, all these teams have challenges here.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to go with the healthiest teams, right? That would be my initial thought. So Milwaukee, who's only missing a Dante DiVincenzo, right? Then Phoenix, who potentially could get Chris Paul back for game 1 and miss absolutely nobody. And then you go to Atlanta. I mean, because DeAndre Hunter's a pretty big piece, and that's where you get into the mud, right? DeAndre Hunter's missing, Kawhi Leonard's missing, of course, Kyrie Irving's missing. And so I'd probably put Brooklyn up there as well, because you can get by with 2 of the big 3. And then after that, take your pick between the rest of them. But I tend to look at the teams that are the healthiest when we're at this point, especially in a year like this, when I'm kind of sorting them out.
The podcast is the Hardwood Handicapers. He also is host on ESPN Las Vegas Radio. He joins us, Jonathan Von Tobel, at MeJVT on Twitter. And as all guests, he appears thanks to our video stream, live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter as well, sporting the Clippers hat on the stream. Good luck to your Clippers moving forward. Appreciate you jumping on again.
Thanks for having me again, Josh.